My name is James. I'm 47 years old, and this is my story. Um, my life started off pretty rough. I grew up in a home with two addicted parents. My mom suffered pretty severe mental illness as well. I think she had bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. She grew up very rough. Was abused by her siblings and people in her life. And her solution that she found was alcohol and drugs. My dad also grew up very, very, very much abused. His mom suffered severe depression, alcoholism, and addiction. And she and his mother ended up taking her own life when I was 13. My parents were very broken people, very abusive, violently, mentally, emotionally. Um, Grew up in my household. It was very unpredictable. I never knew what to expect from one minute to the next. I go to bed at night, everything would be cool. I'd get up in the morning and my mom would fly off the handle and just start beating the crap out of me for God knows what reasons. When I was, just little, I got taken away a lot by the state. Grew up in foster homes with family. Back then, they'd put you back in your home before the bruises even healed. Um, so, you know, Arrested development early on. I was very fearful. I was a very emotional kid. I wanted everything to be okay. I always wanted people to be okay. I wanted to fix everything. I wanted my parents to be okay, and you know, um, I would, I try to save everybody. It was a very, very, very toxic. I just remember always kind of just being fearful all the time. Um, and My parents split up when I was young. I remember my mom taking us to another town, like hiding us out. I couldn't tell anybody my name, or I couldn't go to school or anything. Um, because my dad was going to hunt us down and God knows what. And yeah, that's just kind of, I just remember, always feeling fear in my life. My parents were, God, the things that they would say to me and my sister were just horrendous, just stupid, you're fat, you're lazy, we should have never had you guys, just you name it. Just, and then it was, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And, don't hit. And then they'd hit us or they'd hit each other. When people would come over because they were drunks, it was only, I knew when people would come over at night, literally 99% of the time, the whole house would break out in a fight. Um, because my mom was just nuts and just would stir up crap and then get my dad into it. So, yeah, I just kind of grown up like that, and that's just what I knew. And instilling and try to instill values in kids, not to hit or not to lie, but then they'd hit us or hit each other or fight each other. Or don't lie, but then my mom would have me lie for her, my dad would have me lie for him. Um, Early on, there's a lot of arrested development there. And I just remember always feeling alone and isolated. Um, I could be in a room full of people and I never felt part of ever in my life, until I got sober. But, um, I started drinking and smoking pot at a pretty early age. My grandmother, my dad's mom, the one that took her life, uh, I started drinking with her at about 11. She, when my parents split up, I went and lived with her for some time before she passed, and she we'd go in the kitchen. She didn't want my grandpa knowing she was drinking, so we go in the kitchen and she'd fill up her coffee cup full of vodka, and then she put a little of mine, and we go out and split a cigarette. And I loved it because it was like our bonding time, and she wasn't hitting me, she wasn't telling me I was stupid, she wasn't hurting me. It was like the first woman in my life that actually treated me with respect, and I loved her. So that was real tough. That was my safe space. That was I couldn't live with my dad because my dad was really violent, and I couldn't live with my mom because she was very violent. But and by that time, I guess by that time, my mom had kind of stopped being so violent because I'd gotten bigger, and so she really couldn't do that to me anymore. It was just really emotional and psychological at that point with her. But anyways, after my grandma did that, my dad came up uh, to clean up the mess, essentially, and the police came, and it was chaos. I'll never forget that day. I woke up to the sound of a gunshot, and my grandpa frantically yelling and screaming, "What the fuck did you do? What the fuck did you do?" And I got up and I was just like, "What's going on out here?" And he's like, "Your grandma just shot herself." And I'm like, "What?" And it was just so confusing to me. Anyway, chaos ensued, police, ambulance, everything like that. And then my dad came up, and my dad grew up hunting and fishing his whole life, and my dad's a killer. That's what he does. He gets mad about things. Goes out and shoots shit, kills stuff. That's what he taught me to do from early on. That's just the nuts and bolts of it. He taught me how to shoot guns from the time I could hold a gun up. And we just killed stuff, animals, any chance we got. That's just what he did. And if we had an animal that got sick or whatever, we'd take it out and shoot it. And so that's just how my pops was. And so my grandma's, blood and brains are on the floor. We got to go in there and clean it up. So I'm 13 years old cleaning that up. And I just remember it being how fucked up that was. But almost feeling like somewhat like, is this normal? Am I supposed to be doing this? I guess I am. I mean, he wouldn't tell me not to. And then my uncle, my dad's brother, showed up, and it was across the street. He wouldn't come over, and he started firing guns off over there. And then there was a big, almost like a fight outside, and he kept saying, "You killed her, you killed her." So my uncle was then accusing my grandpa of shooting my grandma. And it was just chaos. Anyways, after the funeral, my dad went to take me back home, and I didn't want to live with him. He was very abusive, and I just didn't want to be there. And so we got almost to the house, and I remember looking at him and saying, "I don't want to live with you." And I remember he looked at me like he wanted to take my life, and we pulled in the driveway. I remember he put the car in park, and he looked at me for a second, and he just started punching me. I jumped out of the truck and tried to run from him, and he chased me down, and just mauled me like a bear. And then he told me to pack my shit. So I went and packed my stuff up and put it in the truck, and he drove me and dropped me off at my mom's house. And that's when that's when I started drinking. So I moved in with her about 13 is when I really, really started drinking. My buddies. Alcohol was my first love, I could say, because it gave me some agency in my life. It made me feel secure. It made me feel safe. I didn't feel fear anymore when I was drunk. The problem with that is that I liked it too much, and I started blackout drinking at like 13 years old, 14 years old. I would, I'd black out, beat up my friends, just whatever, do weird shit. I was nuts. Smoking pot a lot, getting suspended and expelled from school, getting arrested, just all the stuff. You know, I think I started doing meth. Well, about 15, I went and moved in with a friend. Just because, I didn't want anybody telling me shit. I was just done. I felt like I was just done being told anything. I was 15 and I knew it was good for me. So moved in with a friend and started drinking heavily. And then, I was blacking out. Then I beat him up. And so then they kicked me out and I go back to my mom and kind of bouncing all over the place. But I started doing meth at about that time. And man, there was a lot of violence going on in my life at that time. I grew up in a smaller community, a lot of people don't think that there's like gang activity and stuff like that. But you know, me and my friends were, you call us wannabes, but we were doing all the stuff that gangsters do. We were packing guns and stabbing people and shooting people and fighting. And my first felony charge was a riot, for like a 16-man fight where my friend stabbed three guys that jumped me. Just chaos, constant chaos in my life. I was always, always, always in like fight or flight. I just always remember I did not feel okay unless there was something chaotic going on in my life. Never. I just like, if things were still and calm for a minute, I either knew the other shoe was about to drop at any time or I needed to go find something to chaos in my life because I never felt comfortable in my own skin. Um, you know, uh, my relationships were all fucked up. I didn't know how to be in a relationship. I didn't know how to have friendships. I didn't know how to treat people. I was scared of everybody and everything. I just knew that if I let anybody close to me, they'd hurt me. And so I always went into every situation realizing like, I'm going to get them before they get me type thing. I never really connected with people. So, I had some really close friends, but even them, I just didn't, I just knew they were always out to get me. I just felt that inside of me because I couldn't trust them because I couldn't trust my parents. And I had no relationship with a God of any kind because I felt like God was just like my parents, like this weird, unforgiving, I don't want you around unless you're doing exactly what I say. That was my concept of what a God was, and I didn't want any part of that. Um, I started going to treatment centers and jail at 18. Um, I went to my first treatment center when I was 15, but I really started going to institutions when I was about 18. Like I said, I got a riot charge when I was 18. And that kind of just, get out of jail, get on parole, flee, get arrested, pick up more charges, just the whole cycle of that, of addiction, constant addiction. I had some relationships, had some kids in between all that. Um, my I leaned into self pity early on in life. Being in survival mode my whole life, I leaned heavily into self pity, and I really like just kind of embraced. I was done wrong. I need to get my needs met somehow, and so I just didn't give a fuck who I stepped on. That's the reality of it. I didn't wake up in the morning and set out to hurt people, but I'm going to get mine. Is what was my mentality, and it was like me and my sponsor talked about this, and you go through life and you try to get your needs met all the time because you're not getting them met as a kid. Eventually, that self-centeredness kicks in, um, and then you start saying, "I don't just want my needs met. Now I want my wants met." And you know, you just I just stepped on everybody's toes. I didn't care. I took and took and took, left a path of destruction in my wake. Um, Anybody that I came into contact with, I hurt in some way, shape, or form. I didn't know how to have a healthy relationship. I didn't know what that looked like. I never saw one in my life, and that's not an excuse. That's just a reality of it. Um, I went to prison for the first time when I was 21, I believe. For we had gotten to some stuff with the guy, and this guy went over to my friend's house over some drugs. Took a baseball bat to his house and threatened him and his kids, his wife and kids. And I, in the wreckage of my past, had slept with his girlfriend, his baby's mom, while he was in jail. He's supposed to be my friend. And so, I felt some sort of guilt. So I thought, well, I'll make up for it. I'll go stick up for the guy. So when his baby's mom called me and told me, hey, this guy's at my house with a baseball bat, I ran down there to save the day. And we got in the argument with these guys. And then I took the baseball bat out of this guy's hand and told him to beat it. And he ended up leaving. And then as they were leaving, they were screaming out a bunch of threats. And so later that night, we went to their house and I put a ski mask on and we went in their front door and we just started fighting with everybody. And I ended up hitting this guy with a baseball bat and hurting him pretty bad. And then we drove away and we got pulled over. I got out of the car and ran. Anyway, when they caught me, I ended up getting 5 years for that. I did about 3.5 on that, almost 4. And I got out. A bunch of my friends were doing really good. And I kind of looked around. I was like, well, I'm just one of those people that I kind of like rise to the occasion, whatever that is. If you're doing good, you're my friend, then I'm going to try to do whatever you're doing or better, whatever that is. So a lot of my friends were doing good. All right, I'm going to do good. So I just kind of I didn't address any of my issues when I was in prison. I was just like, fuck it, I'm just not going to do drugs. I'm just going to do this. So I got married, bought a house, got a good job. Got a job at the Thai plant here in town. And, there's guys waiting 15 years to get that job. But I worked with somebody that knew somebody that got me the job after 11 months out of prison. I started the Thai plant. It's a good job. My wife and I have a kid, buy a house for my dad. But I'm miserable. I'm smoking pot. I'm in the closet smoking pot, just so I can function because I'm miserable in my skin. Being a codependent person, being an alcoholic or drug addict, I don't know how to have relationships unless I have a God. And at that point, I couldn't even conceptualize what God looked like or anything. And so I took everything personal. I felt like she was always cheating on me or she was always out to get me or, I just took everything personal. I felt like I deserved better, me. And then, I convinced myself that I deserved better. And I mean, regardless, we were young and we neither one of us were perfect, but instead of communicating with her, I would just hold it all in and then snap on her, bottle it up and scream at her and tell her what a piece of shit she was because she hurt me. She probably didn't even realize what was going on. I just was taking everything personal. And, I left her after my son was about 6 months old and ended up hooking up with another woman and who was a friend of ours. And then just, destroying her and the 2 beautiful daughters that she brought to the marriage that loved me like a dad. And then my 6-month-old son abandoned him. And, I started drinking heavily again. I missed my family. When I left, I mean, I wanted the freedom of just doing whatever the fuck I wanted. I wanted just to be able to do what I wanted. I thought that I deserved better, but I missed them badly because I was really codependent at the time, and I felt like I need people in my life, and I needed that. And rather than trying to fix things with her, I chose the other route to start getting loaded. But I still, I missed her, and I missed my family, and that fueled my drinking. And so when I drink, I'd either get violent or I'd get depressed, and that's another thing. I suffered with depression my whole life. I was the kind of person that was always planning ways to off myself throughout my life. Like that was just kind of what I did. I was always planning on it. I always put it off. It was like I'd plan it for like October, and then something like good would happen or something would set me off in a different direction. And so then I'd be like, oh, I can wait. And then I can always do it later. I always had the mentality that I would never see past 16 and then 17 and then 19. And I always had that mentality that I was just not going to live very long. And I was always in fight or flight. So it was just always just in fear and fear and fear and fear. And I just felt like I never had anything to lose. Anyway, so when I started drinking real heavily there, the depression came back real strong. And I got to a place where I couldn't do it anymore. I ended up meeting this woman that was doing a lot of meth. And then I started doing meth with her again. I hadn't done it in like 10 years. And man, I said this in the meeting last night. It's like, on the one hand, alcohol made me, very depressed, hopelessly depressed, where, I saw no way out. And then I would do meth, and then that would make me so paranoid that I felt like everybody was out to get me. So then I felt like I had to defend myself or get them before they got me. And so I would kind of try to balance the two. I like drinking, but I don't like being depressed. And so I would try to do meth to try to balance it. And instead of quitting because I'm nuts, I would just try to, like a chemist, try to figure out the perfect amount of both to make me, even keel. And that backfired. I started really leaning into the meth, and I got extremely paranoid. And the only time I drink then was so I could sleep at least a couple hours. But I would sleep in I owned a home that I put up for sale. I would rent another home in Washington, but I wouldn't sleep in either one of them because I knew that people were coming to kill me. So I would sleep in my car while I'd leave it running, like at rest areas, and hold my pistol in my hand while I'd sleep for a couple hours. And then as soon as I'd wake up, I'd put my car in drive and drive off. And kind of maybe a little background about that, about the paranoia was while I was in the prison the first time, I joined a gang. So I joined a white supremacist gang. And it, I'm not a white supremacist. My dad was a bigot. He planted those seeds in me early on, but, I just wanted to fit in, to be honest with you. And in prison, you kind of have to click up with your own kind, with your people. So it was fine. There was just a bunch of dysfunctional people like I was. So I could pretend like I was a white supremacist to fit in. I pretended to be all kinds of things throughout my life. So, So anyway, when I left prison, I left the gang, and, they don't really like that too much. So I kind of had a target on my back, which didn't really matter when you're doing good. If you're not around those kind of people, they're not going to come hunt you down at your house with your wife and kids. But if you're in the lifestyle and you're doing the stuff again, you end up running into those people. And that's what happened. Those people started coming back into my life, and, I don't know how much of it was paranoia, and I don't know how much of it was actual stuff that was going on, but there was some stuff going on. Whether my life was in jeopardy or not, I don't know. I felt like it was, but I was also doing a lot of meth and I was paranoid. And I ended up in a situation with a former, with a gang member that was from the gang that I was in. And I ended up in a situation with him where I felt unsafe. I was high on meth and drunk, and I took his life in a situation. I'll spare the details on here, but I felt very fearful. And again, I don't know how much of that is real. I don't know how much of it's psychosis, because there was a lot of that going on. The fact of the matter is that I took somebody's life, and you can't take that back. And so, yeah. And then instead of, I'm a felon, and instead of going and turning myself in, then I tried to cover it up, and ended up going to Washington and trying to steal a car. And then I ended up robbing and shooting another man while I was on the run. He lived, fortunately. Just an innocent man. He was just out fishing, and I tried to steal his truck. And I changed that man's life, probably for the rest of his life, and probably a lot of people in his life. I don't remember a lot of it because I was really on a lot of drugs and a lot of alcohol. I know, reading the police reports and people telling me stories, and I don't know how much. I don't remember a lot of it, but I know I did it. And once they caught me, about 2 weeks later, and they arrested me, man, I remember going to jail and just sleeping. I don't know how long I slept. It was days, maybe a week. I remember waking up, kind of snapping out of it, like just a little bit dazed, and I was just like, and it started coming to me, kind of like the chaos, and I'm like, how much do they know? What did I, and then this charges started coming in. First the robbery and assault. I was arrested in Washington, so then that came in. And then when my lawyer came and saw me, he's like, "Hey, you're talking about a crime where somebody lost their life in Oregon, and they're talking about you being the aggressor, you being the offender in that. Do you know anything about that?" And I was like, "Nope." And he's like, "Well, there's a gang task force that's actually they're looking into it. They're looking at you for it." And I was like, "Well, I don't know, And so, then that happened, and then they ended up indicting me and charging me for that, for taking the life of a man. After it was all said and done, I was sentenced to 31 years to life in prison. That was in 2007. I went to prison. Well, so when all this happened, my the girlfriend that I got with, I got her pregnant, and so when I got arrested, she was 3 months pregnant. And so, I had a baby that was on the way, and anyway, so I go to prison, and baby's born, and I don't have any contact with her mom. Her mom, unfortunately, battled with addiction the whole time I was in, and so anyway, I didn't really have any contact with the daughter until about 4 years ago. But anyways, when I get inside, being a person that dropped out of a gang and then took the life of another gang member, white supremacist, that put a pretty big target on me. Luckily that happened in Oregon, and then I went to Washington prison. So people didn't really know the logistics of it. So I was able to kind of posture and jockey and make a name for myself there, to where I didn't really get fucked with too bad. I'm one of those people that I just, you can't really tell me shit. I'm not going for it. So I ended up doing a lot of fighting, a lot of riots, a lot of chaos, drugs, alcohol, a lot of just chaos, just doing inmate shit for a long time. I always joke and tell people that, you'd think that getting a life sentence would be my bottom, but I got in there and tried to find the biggest shovel I could get my fucking hands on to dig myself in a bigger hole. I spent a lot of time in segregation, years and years and years. While I was there, after I've been sentenced, I've been in for a couple of years. My mom took her life. My mom was an alcohol and drug addict, like I said before, and she gave up. Ended up drinking herself to death. Took overdosed on pills and alcohol. Sent me all the money out of her bank account, and then did that, and so that was pretty rough. And then I spent years in segregation, just isolated. I just had this mentality of I just don't give a fuck. I have nothing to lose. But in reality, I cared, and I was hurt deeply, and I was so fearful, and I was so scared that I was never going to go home. And I knew that I'd buried myself in a fucking grave while I was alive, and it was just a scary place. So I just told myself that I didn't give a fuck. I told everybody else that, and I didn't believe me, but other people did, and so they left me alone pretty good. It got to a point in my life inside where I just got so miserable, and really nothing had really happened other than I was just fucking miserable. I just was so uncomfortable in my own skin. I use the analogy that the chickens had come home to roost. Like I had no way of like finding something worth living for anymore. I just didn't have it. I couldn't find something that was of value for life anymore. Um, and I just, so I started, I, so I dug in. I started reading self-help books. Um, I started going to college. Started creating programs. I'm like, okay, I want to do something different. Well, backtrack. I spent years at Walla Walla in Clallam Bay, they're like maximum security prisons in Washington. They're this gangland over there. Um, I was getting miserable there. I wanted out, but I didn't know how. So eventually, I decided I wanted out, and so you can't change it Walla Walla. It's you can, but you can't really. It's gangland, and there's always shit going on. Riots are popping off. Stuff is happening over there always, and so it's like you try to change your life. You want to go out with a positive attitude, and then there's constantly racial tension. There's constantly, hey, we're about ready to get down with the northern, you know, we're about to get down with another gang. We're about to do this. Or, this. There's tension over the showers. There's this. It's very hard to have a mindset of growth in a place like that because you always have to be ready to fight or worse. Last incident, we got into a pretty big riot. I got 85-man riot with another group, and I just, I had enough at that point. I had enough fighting. I just had enough chaos, and so I decided I want to get out of there. And so I remember telling the investigators, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore." And they're like, "Okay, well, we need you to kind of keep the peace for a little while beforehand." So they were like literally using me to keep the peace with this group while they're getting information constantly that the whites are going to stab me for not pursuing this issue with these guys. Because once something happens, they want you to like, if you get into it with another group, they want you to keep it going. Like you get into a riot, and then once you come off lockdown from that riot, you're supposed to be like taking off on these guys or doing whatever it is, and on site is what they call it. And I refused. I'm like, nah, fuck no, I'm not doing that. And they didn't like that, so they started putting out, notes trying to get people to stab me and things like that. And so I remember right before I left, the investigators called me in their office and said, "Hey, we just intercepted this note," and they let me read it. And it was like, "Hey, everybody called me JP in prison. They're like, hey, you need to get him." They kind of gave him details. They tried to kill him. And then when they went to his cell, they pat him down because in there you pat you down all the time. They found the note on him, and then they went to the guy's cell to roll his stuff up, and they found a big knife in his cell, and he had drawn a human body on his mattress with like kill points on the mattress. And they showed me those pictures, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to go to protective custody?" And I was like, no, I don't. I was like, my ego just wouldn't let me do it. I'm not going to go to protective custody. I'm going to stay here until I can leave, until I go to a different prison. And anyway, I made it out of there. I didn't get stabbed. And I ended up in a prison in Washington. They call them safe harbors. It's like a dropout prison. And, I went there like this like naive optimism that once I get here, I'll be able to like start changing and everything will be cool because everybody there is going to be like on the same page and doing better. It wasn't like that at all. It was, a lot of the guys that were there didn't go there because they wanted to change their life. They went there because they got crossed out. They were told on somebody, or they did this, or they did that. So they were in trouble. So they were hiding out there. And so they were still doing all the same stuff. They were still doing drugs. They were still doing all the same shit. So there was no programs. And so some of us created a program, like a gang intervention program called New Freedom, to kind of help guys get out, that were leaving gangs and stuff. And that was cool. And started working on my education, became a certified personal trainer, nutritionist. And I was doing everything, but really facing my demons, right? I was putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. So I was getting degrees and I was getting certificates and I was doing the stuff, but I wasn't connecting with God. I wasn't surrendering my will. I wasn't doing all the things that we know we got to do. I didn't know yet. And, I was just so fucking miserable. I kept trying all these different things and all these different spiritual books and all this stuff, but nothing that really connected me with God, no 12-step work. And yeah, I remember just getting to a place where I was getting pretty fucking miserable, but at the same time, I still had stuff to look forward to. This new bill, Senate Bill 819, had just passed, and it looked like I was eligible, that I could potentially get some of my time knocked off my sentence. I had been doing better, so I was kind of putting a portfolio together of certificates and doing stuff, helping people out. Still wasn't doing the real work though. The years were passing by, and yeah, I applied for the Senate bill, and backtrack. I got to a place where it was just I was just in a hopeless state of mind. I guess I was saying a little bit ago before I got doubled back, was that I got to a place where I didn't feel comfortable at all in my own skin. I couldn't look myself in the mirror anymore. I couldn't look people in the eyes anymore. I couldn't, I wanted to stop going to do the programs. I wanted to stop going to school. I just didn't feel okay. And even though I was fighting and clawing to try to get out of prison, I didn't believe that it actually could happen. It was a hope. I was sentenced to 31 years to life, and it was like, maybe I'll get out, hopefully one day. And in my mind, I had all that guilt and shame, and I thought there was no way they were ever going to let me out. But I wanted to hope. I wanted to, anyways. I ended up, getting to a place where I couldn't see any hope. And so I reached out to my uncle, who's my sponsor now. And I was just like, hey, man, I need help. And he's like, man, I've been waiting for this phone call for a long time. And I became willing at that point to do anything it took to not feel that way anymore. He suggested I start working the steps. So I did, because I was fucking miserable. I was dying inside. And I would, at that point, I'd try anything. And I started reading, and the big book started making sense to me more than ever had. I'd been around AA and NA my whole life because my parents were in that off and on my whole life, but I didn't think I was an alcoholic and drug addict. I just thought I was nuts. And so, I just did drugs and alcohol. I didn't know. And I started working the steps. I became really willing. And at the same time, I started putting my stuff together to try to get out of prison. And simultaneously, it's all happening. I'm working the steps. Miracles are happening. I'm starting to feel better. I get a God. I find a God that I can understand, that I can relate to. Something that I can actually surrender my will to, without having to go to church with some weird, unrealistic expectations that there's no way I could live up to. Because I tried that many times before and it never fucking worked for me. And so, once I got a God and actually surrendered, that's when my life changed. That's when the miracles really started happening for me, because that's when I became willing to actually start taking a look at the shit, because there was something I could lean on. I remember working the steps, and all the resentments and all the hurt that I had as a kid from my parents and from the people that hurt me and stuff. I was able to start looking at it, and God doesn't do things by accident in my world, and it's no accident that my uncle is my sponsor, and that's my mom's brother. And he grew up as my dad's friend. And so he knew them. He knew the real, I didn't know them. I only knew what they gave me, which was fucking harsh. But he knew who they were. And so working the steps, he was able to tell me, hey, this is kind of how they grew up. And these are things maybe you didn't realize. And when he did that and shared that with me, that kind of gave me a different view of things, where I was able to see them as human and not as the monsters that I had saw them as for so long. And then I was able to forgive them, and with that came, seeing my own character defects and seeing, the shit that I was doing, and seeing the patterns that I had, because that's the beauty of the steps for me was, looking at my 4-step and seeing like all of the resentments that I had, aside from the ones that I had no control over, things that people did to me, but seeing the resentments that I was packing on. There was a pattern, and that pattern was self-centeredness, was fear, was ego. And that got me ready, because now I'd forgiven, the people that had hurt me. And then I had realized that there was patterns in my behavior. And then I was able to go, oh shit, I was a real asshole. And then I was actually able to start owning up to my own shit. I remember getting to steps 8 and 9, or 8 specifically, and my sponsor, I'm like, man, I think I already covered a lot of this stuff. And he's like, I just write it down. He kind of just tricked me into writing a bunch of names down, because he's like, you may not have to make amends to them. Just write their names down. And, I realized at that point, like every single person that I came into contact in my life, I hurt, either directly or indirectly. And the good news about that is that I was able to, because of seeing that my parents and the people that hurt me were human, I was able to see myself as human. And so I was able to look at that and go, I'm human. It's okay to say this. It happened. I can't not make it happen by not saying it fucking happened. And then I became real willing just to do whatever it took, because once I started making some amends, it felt so good, because it was like pressure. Every time it was like a release valve. It was like, oh God, and like my sponsor told me too early on. He's like, look, if you just, that feeling you get when you start pulling the shit up, well, that's as bad as it gets. But then you always shove it back down. And really what you're doing, it's festering, because then you carry it around and it sucks. But if you pull it up and look at it, it's just that bad, just like right before you shove it back down. And I was like, and when he said that, he said it in a way that I could understand it. And I was like, all right. And so I did that, and it worked, right? And so, because he did that for me, then I started sponsoring men inside, and I started creating, AA and NA groups inside, and as mentorship program, and just being of service, because that's what kept me sane in there, was once I really started being of service to other people. So what really saved my life was sponsoring people. Really just getting out there and just being of service. It kept me grounded, emotionally regulated, because I was putting in for this resentencing, right? I was like, man, I was trying, I was praying, I was hoping, my self-centered brain thought, well, every time I read the promises, 9-step promises, I'm like, okay, these promises mean I'm going to get out of prison. Like, I really believe that. Like, I'm just like, okay, just got to get through these things, and then God is going to get me out of here. I just know it. And, I mean, the funny part is it really happened, but it doesn't mean I'm a psychic. It just means that's just obviously with God's plan. But, so yeah, I just kept doing the thing, showing up, being of service, when I was fearful, just, helping others, just pour myself into helping other people, just doing the next right thing, trust God, clean house, be of service to others. That's how I live my life in there every day. Not even when I didn't want to, it's a negative environment. It's a hard place to change your life, but it's not impossible, because I did it. So all this time I'm putting in for resentencing, and my first hearing I go to, or I don't go to it personally, my attorney, my best friend that I was in prison with, go to a committee hearing for Senate Bill 819. And they review my case and they say, hey, let's give this guy a chance. We want to talk to him. And then the sheriff's department here in the Dalles came forward and said I was a sociopath and they didn't want me out of prison. And so then that put a bunch of fear in me. And throughout that, my sponsor just kept telling me, have faith. We don't know what's going to happen. It's none of your business. Just keep doing the work. And it was so fucking scary. And then I had a hearing and I got to talk and they were still willing. And then one of the committee members came forward and said, if you let James out of prison, I'm going to quit. And they still said, okay, go ahead, quit. We're going to let him out. And that's not because I'm just a Jesus or some miracle worker. I don't know why it is. I just know God has a plan for us all. And that was a miracle in my life. You know, they wanted me to do a psychological evaluation. And I don't know about you, but for a drug and alcohol addict, for somebody that's lived a life of chaos and violence my whole life, I wondered if I was a sociopath. I mean, I felt isolated my whole life. I never felt connected with anybody. I didn't even know what the fuck the word empathy meant. And so you got to take a psyche eval. Don't worry though. You're going to pass it just fine. All these people are telling me, oh, you'll be fine, except my sponsor's laughing. So I can't wait to hear this. And I'm like, you're laughing, man, but this is my life on the line, motherfucker. And he's like, oh, you're going to be fine. Just be honest, you know? And so I remember showing up to the psych eval and just, you know, praying before I went and just saying, hey, you know, listen, I just want you to know that I'm going to be honest with you today. And, you know, I think it's funny some of the shit that I say because I feel like people, normies, just probably are like, duh. I mean, what else would you be? But it's for me. I need to say that kind of shit because otherwise I might come in there and try to bullshit, try to impress you. I mean, I have a psychology degree. So in my mind, I probably go in there thinking maybe I could outsmart this woman. And so it's important for me to say those type of things. It's just being accountable, right? Just being just like, you know, hey, just FYI, I'm going to be honest. But anyway, so, I mean, I poured my guts out. I told her everything. I told her everything about my life. I told her that she, you know, have you ever had ideations? Have you had, you know, ideations of taking your own life? Yep. My whole life I did. Wow. You know, did you drink and use in prison? Absolutely. All the time. Every chance I got. You know, she was just like, okay. And I was like, yeah, I mean, until I decided I was done, you know, until I hit bottom and, you know, just honesty. I didn't pull any punches. I didn't bullshit her. And I passed the psych eval. You know, I had to read that. That was shitty. You know, she sent the psych eval to me for me to read before we turn it over to the DA. And for anybody that's ever read one of those about themselves, it sucks because you're just like, ooh, that's cringy. The important stuff was no personality disorders, nothing alarming as far as that goes. That was the important stuff, right? You know, after I read it a few times, I was like, okay, so basically what it says is I'm human because I don't know anybody that hasn't struggled with some form of depression, even a little bit. So anyway, so yeah, then, you know, that was the deal. We will let you out of prison if you can pass the psych eval. It took almost a year to get that done, though. And so every step of the way, I'm full of fear. I'm full of fear. I'm full of fear. You know, scared to death, thinking anything's going to change because things change. There's in the justice system, right? There's no justice in this country. You just never know. And you see horror stories constantly in prison where it's like, oh, you got this thing coming. And then all of a sudden they pull it out from underneath your feet. So it's like, I had to remind myself all the time that God's in charge. He either is or he isn't. And so whatever is supposed to happen is supposed to happen. And what a hard pill to swallow when you're talking about doing life in prison or getting out, right? Show up and be honest. And I'm just thinking like, but if I'm honest, and what if I'm honest and then they don't like what I say and then I don't get out of prison? It didn't matter. I had to be honest. I had to because that's what I signed up to do to get that emotional sobriety that I was getting and that serenity that I was feeling. Fuck, so I kept doing it, you know, and God, it was hard. God, it sucked. It hurt. But the benefits of it, the peace of mind, the serenity that I felt when I went to sleep at night, I just kept doing it. And it kept paying off. Kept paying off. Every single time I did it, it paid off. And it was like putting money in the bank, because I tell people this, and when we were inside, this right here is like SEALs training. We're in here practicing for the community. Like, we're in here every day, building new neural pathways, taking a right instead of a left, doing the thing every day, day in and day out, day in and day out, day in and day out. It's training. It's like boot camp. And that way, when we go get shot over to Fallujah and the bullets are flying at us, it is default. Okay, now I know what to do, because I've done it time and time and time and time again. And I would tell the guys I was sponsoring that, I would say that in the meetings all the time, and I convinced myself of it too. And thank God I did, because, all those things that I did have paid off. Anyways, obviously I'm out now. So on December 23rd, I woke up that morning. I was still doing a life sentence. I knew I had a court date that morning, scared to death, because even though the DA and everybody was saying I was going to get out, the judge had to approve it. And then you just never know. And we're talking about taking a man's life. We're not talking about bank robbery or theft. We're talking about, I took somebody's life. And then not only did I do that, but then I went over in another state and shot somebody else. And, changed my life. But there's people in prison, thousands of people in prison, that did way less than I have, and have done way more things in prison to better themselves than I did. And they're still sitting in there rotting with life sentences. And so I didn't have anything coming. There was nothing. I wasn't entitled to shit. It was a hope. Another miracle that happens. The judge that was presiding over my case happened to be, so I my daughter that I told you about, that was born when I got to prison, she's been in the system her whole life. So for the last 3 years, I've been going to these child dependency cases, these court hearings, and this judge has been presiding over him. His name's Judge. I won't say his name because I don't want to do that. Anyways, he's been presiding over him, and so he gets to know me. My child dependency attorney is different from my criminal attorney, but every single time we show up to court, Your Honor, my client is doing this. He just created a program. He just got a psychology degree. He just did this. He just did that. He just did this. She doesn't know that he's going to be my resentencing judge. She doesn't know anything. She just wants to put me in a good light so that, he sees me in favor when he's talking about me and my daughter, because the mom's not showing up. And man, God is funny this way. And I'm nervous. I don't know what judge I'm going to have. I don't know what's going on. That's the one thing I'm scared of, is that there's going to be a judge in there that's not going to know me, or maybe that does know me from my past. And it's going to be like, no, we're not letting James Polk out of prison. Fuck no. We got him in there for life. That's where he's staying. Because that's what the voices are telling me. That's what my mind is saying to me. And anyway, I go to a dependency hearing about 2 weeks before my hearing, my actual resentencing hearing. And the judge shows up on the screen and he's like, "Hey, Mr. Polk, how you doing today?" I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And he's like, "Man, you look good today." And I was like, "Thank you." And he's like, "Hey, you got a glow about you, man. Something different about you." And I was like, "All right, thanks." And like everybody in the courtroom's laughing, and then we have our hearing about my daughter, and we move on. And then 2 weeks later, man, he shows up in the courtroom to resentence me, and it was the God that I have today, the God of my understanding today, is just a miracle worker. Because then I was able to walk into that courtroom and see him, and everybody in the courtroom is familiar to me. And so now my guard is down, and I feel safe, and I feel secure, and I feel resourced. And I think, hey, if there's a chance in the world, it's right now, because this man right here knows me. I don't have to explain all the good stuff that I've been doing to him. He knows, because we've been telling him for the last 3 years. And, my family and everybody was there. And there was people that did not want me to get out of prison. None of them showed up. Nobody showed up to say no. I remember the judge kept asking. He asked probably 4 times. It was stressing me out. At the hearing, everybody came. My family came and spoke. Everybody spoke. My attorney, Eliza Kaplan, an amazing human being, she spoke. The DA, I'm Matt Ellis. I want James out. The judge kept saying, "Is there anybody in this courtroom that does not want Mr. Polk out? Because is there a victim? Is there somebody here?" And the first time he said it, I was just waiting because I can't see the whole courtroom. I mean, I'm on video. I'm just waiting, and then here comes my brother. Sits down. I'm like, and then he speaks, and then after he gets done talking, the judge says, "Anybody else have anything to say?" And then another family member, another friend. And he's like, "Okay, I just need to know, is there a victim or anybody here?" And I'm just like, "Stop asking that." But nobody did. There was nobody that came forward and said no. And that's a fucking miracle, man. You know? And so he agreed. They vacated the charge of, they vacated my charge, and I pled guilty to a lesser included offense. So I was charged initially with taking a man's life, and then I pled guilty to a lesser included offense of recklessly taking a man's life instead of intentionally taking a man's life. And I was granted immediate release that day, and I got out of prison. My life sentence was overturned that day, and I was released at 3:00 in the afternoon. It was a miracle. It was a fucking miracle. I remember walking out of those doors. It's just it's surreal. The first thing I did when my buddy was videoing me, the first thing I did was to say, "Thank you, God." And I haven't stopped thanking him since. It's been about 52 days. I went to Seattle. That's where I live. I work for a company called Justice Solutions. We believe that there's no justice in this country. There's just us. And that by just us, we mean system impacted people, survivors of trauma and addiction and all the things. We work with lawyers and state representatives and senators in Washington State, helping system impacted people with addiction issues and unhoused. I've been reconnecting with my family. I've been down here. I just came to my hometown to stay the weekend for my first time since I've been out. I spoke with some law students at Lewis and Clark Law Center on Friday. I spoke at a speaker meeting last night. A week ago, I got my LLC, launching my first business called Second Chance Stoic Healing. It's like a trauma-informed kind of fitness thing where I use my lived experience and just use the holistic approach of healing, what worked for me. It's like a combination of 12-step program and CBT, fitness, and just stuff. You'll learn more about it on my website soon. Just the relationships that I have today, all the skills, all the recovery that I got inside. My sponsor kept telling me that. He just kept saying, I know that I've never been in prison. I know that it's different for you. I know this. It's the same principles out here, though. And I'm glad that he kept telling me that, because when I got out and shit got scary, because shit's gotten scary, because I'm not used to being around normies. I have a very strong sense of imposter syndrome right now. I'm out here. I testified in front of legislation 2 weeks ago, the state capitol. I shake hands with senators and state representatives. I go to judges' houses for dinner. I go to lawyers' houses for dinner. And I was just in a cage 52 days ago. It's just weird. It's fucking weird. The people that I'm used to being around have tattoos all over their face, and they're gang members, and so being around people that are just dressed like normal people, and I mean, even being in AA and NA meetings around people that I know haven't been to prison before, it's weird. It was at first. I'm getting better about it now. I go to a lot of meetings, but it's just a trip. But I stay grateful. I stay humble. I started really just using my voice and using the social media platform to kind of get my voice out there, because that's something when you're inside, you don't have a voice. You're not seen. You're not heard. And I got real fucking sick of that. I got real tired of that because that's how I felt growing up. It's just like nobody hears me, nobody sees me. And once I realized that I had a good story and I had a good message, and I know that what I have to say has changed a lot of lives and impacts people, and I became willing to be honest and talk. Um, I just realized that like I need to be heard. So yeah, so I use my social media and I post every morning. I do a video every morning, and I connect with people, and I just show up for people today. Um, and so I think that's the biggest thing is what I do today is I'm able to be present every day for people. Um, yeah, and I'm just super grateful, man.